hope you're all doing well. During this chaotic time of COVID-19, I can probably speak for myself and for many others that living in isolation and solitude is pretty rough. We miss our friends, we miss our families, and we most importantly miss the outside world around us. But what if we were forced to live like that every single day of our lives? Kind of sounds like jail, right? Well, that's the reality for animals that are living in captivity, especially at zoos right now. Today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why you shouldn't support zoos and their efforts to maintain these animals in captivity for their entire lives. I'll first talk about the issues that arise when you support these zoos, such as confinement and limited care, emotional and mental well-being of these captive animals, and the idea that zoos are primarily used for maintaining endangered populations, when in reality it's not actually the case and it's not ethical either. I also want to provide an answer to these problems because we do have things that we need to put in place that can help these animals and return them to their natural habitats. And I want you guys to know these answers as well, just because you too have the power to help these living species break free of their normalized captivity life in today's world. So the first problem that arises in zoos is that these animals are kept in confinement their entire lives. This provides them with very limited care. According to PETA and their website, these enclosures that these animals are kept in are almost 100 times smaller than the very minimum space that they need to actually survive in their natural habitat. This prevents these animals from doing things that are natural and important to them, such as running, foraging, climbing, and finding lifelong partners. This lifestyle keeps them cramped and confined every single day. Also, the zoos focus more on operating at a loss and just attracting visitors. This leads them to lose focus on the fact that they have to take care of these wild animals and they have to properly do it as well. For example, whether born in captivity or taken from their natural habitat, zoos don't consider climate and other factors when that should be taken into account. So animals such as polar bears are forced to adapt to hot temperatures in the actual zoo places, and they can't thrive in their natural polar habitats where they're supposed to be. Also, zoos don't consider how much it actually takes to properly nourish wild animals, often providing the bare minimum food and water limits that are needed to survive. And they do this so they can save labor costs and they can save labor for zoo workers, which is not ethical. Furthermore, zoos don't take into account the emotional and mental well-being of animals when they're in captivity. These animals remain isolated, often alone or with very few partners, and it's these animals that often pay the price for it. According to PETA, this stress and lack of stimulation for these wild animals can lead to self-destructive and self-mutilation tendencies, often called zoochosis, which is kind of similar to psychosis in humans. Eventually, animals reach their own breaking points and revert to their natural ways of self-protection, and humans end up getting hurt. But these animals who are doing what is natural to them and what is protecting their own species in their minds is actually getting them killed, often in the name of humans, because they were forced to be captive and they just snap. Finally, most zoos justify their actions with their idea that they breed and capture wild animals just for the sake of endangered species. They speak how they want to preserve these species, but in reality, that's not the case. According to PETA, the majority of species who actually live in zoos are not endangered at all, and less than 12% of zoos are actually working towards these wildlife conservation efforts. Most zoos don't have any plan or any involvement to rehabilitate and return these animals to their natural environment, which is very unethical, and keeping them in captivity can really cause them harm, as we've seen so far. Finally, most zoos justify their actions with their idea that they breed and capture animals for the sake of endangered species preservation, when that's actually not the case. According to PETA, the majority of species that are already in zoos are actually not endangered, and less than 12% of the zoos that are around today actually work towards conservation efforts of these wild species. When zoos breed their wild animals, they profit off of these babies. So the cute little furry babies that you see at the zoos, super cute, super adorable, but eventually they're going to reach an age to where they can't be used because they're not as cute anymore as an older species. So once zoos are done profiting off of these cute babies, they actually just trade them or sell them to other zoos, or they present them with very unethical ways of living for the rest of their lives, or they just all in all kill them, which is very unethical. So as we've seen, these zoos and their ideas of keeping wild animals in captivity their entire lives is actually a problem, and no one's doing anything about it. But there are other answers to help preserve these wildlife species and do it in a more ethical way than keeping them in captivity. Instead of going to zoos for educational purposes, people can watch nature documentaries firsthand, and they can also travel and experience the actual world and the actual wildlife habitats that they see on TV or in zoos, but experiencing them while ethically supporting how animals should live in their natural habitats their entire lives, not in captivity. These zoos and their ideas of keeping wild animals in captivity their entire lives is a real problem, as we've seen. But there are answers to these problems. First, instead of going to zoos for educational purposes, people can watch nature documentaries and learn all the facts that they need to know. Or they can travel and experience these natural habitats that the animals live in firsthand, which is absolutely beautiful if you ask me. Also, people can support the habitat preservation and nonprofit sanctuaries that only rescue, rehabilitate, and return these wild animals to their natural habitats to live out their natural lives. Finally, people should support the idea that animal protection laws that we have now should be enforced and furthermore enhanced. That way it benefits the wildlife, not humans. All in all, we see why zoos aren't so focused on the actual well-being and conservation of wildlife species, but they're more concentrated on making profit off of beautiful animals that are in captivity. These beautiful wild creatures deserve to live a life of freedom where they can mentally and physically be healthy. They deserve to live in their natural environment and be with their own species. They should not have to live in captivity their entire lives. Even though humans shouldn't support zoos and the life of captivity for wild animals, there are answers to these problems, as we've seen. And if you guys want to help out more, any facts that I've said today can be found on PETA's website, which I personally looked up. And it also gives other ways to help endangered species instead of supporting a life of captivity for them. All together, we can end this problem and help maintain the rights, the safety, and the well-being of our world's wildlife.